The mansion stood like a fortress at the end of Maple Ridge Drive, its tall iron gates keeping the world at bay. Inside those gates lived Richard Thornton, a man whose name alone could make businessmen nervous. He owned half the commercial real estate in the city, and people said he had ice water running through his veins instead of blood. But Richard wasn't always like this. 3 years ago, he had a wife who filled the house with laughter and music. Then cancer took her away in 6 brutal months, and Richard sealed off his heart like he was closing a business deal. He threw himself into work, spending 16 hours a day at the office, buying buildings, crushing competitors, doing anything to avoid the emptiness waiting for him at home. The house had 23 rooms, but only one really mattered anymore. That was where his son Daniel spent most of his days. The boy was 12 years old and had never seen a sunrise, never watched birds fly, never looked into his father's eyes. Daniel had been born blind, and while his mother was alive, she made sure that didn't stop him from living. She read to him for hours, took him to parks, let him feel the world through his hands and ears. After she died, Richard couldn't bear to look at his son. Not because he didn't love him. God knows he did. But every time he saw Daniel sitting alone, feeling his way through rooms, Richard felt like he was drowning in failure. He couldn't fix his son's eyes. He couldn't bring back his wife. He couldn't control the one thing that mattered most. So Richard made a decision that he told himself was about protection. He pulled Daniel out of the special school he'd been attending. Too many risks, he said. Too many strangers. Too many things that could go wrong. Daniel would be safer at home with private tutors coming twice a week for basic lessons. The rest of the time, the boy was left to navigate the enormous silent house alone. The staff knew not to bother the child too much. Mr. Thornton's orders were clear. Daniel had his meals delivered to his room. He had audiobooks and talking devices. He had everything money could buy except the one thing he needed most. Someone who actually cared. That's when Maria Santos entered the picture. She arrived on a rainy Tuesday morning, clutching a small suitcase and wearing her best dress, which had been mended twice at the elbows. Maria was 45, with kind eyes and hands roughened by years of hard work. She'd come from the Philippines 8 months earlier, leaving behind 2 teenage children with her sister so she could earn enough to give them a better future. The agency had sent her for a live-in maid position. The pay was excellent, almost too good to be true. But when she met the head housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, she understood why. The house was massive. Mr. Thornton was demanding and cold, and the last 3 maids had quit within months. He's not cruel, Mrs. Chen explained as she showed Maria the service quarters. Just absent. Emotionally, I mean. He comes home late, leaves early, barely speaks to anyone. You do your work, stay invisible, and you'll be fine. Maria nodded, thinking of her son and daughter back home. She could handle invisible. She'd been invisible most of her life. For the first week, Maria learned the routines. She cleaned the marble floors that nobody walked on. She dusted furniture in rooms that nobody used. She prepared meals that Mr. Thornton barely touched before rushing back to his study. The house felt like a museum, beautiful and cold and dead. Then one afternoon, while vacuuming the second-floor hallway, Maria heard something that made her stop. Music. No, not music exactly. Just a single piano key being pressed, then silence. Then another key, another pause. She followed the sound to a room she'd been told to clean only once a week. The music room. Maria pushed the door open carefully and saw him. A boy, thin and small for his age, sitting on the piano bench. His fingers hovered over the keys like he was afraid they might bite him. His eyes, cloudy and unfocused, stared at nothing. Daniel pressed another key, middle C. He held it until the sound faded completely, then sat back with his hands in his lap. Maria watched from the doorway, her heart squeezing. The piano was gorgeous. A massive Steinway grand that probably cost more than she'd earn in 5 years. But it wasn't the piano that caught her attention. It was the longing in the boy's face, the way he touched the keys like they were made of glass, the way he seemed to be reaching for something he couldn't quite find. It's beautiful, Maria said softly. Daniel jumped, his hands flying up defensively. I'm sorry. I wasn't playing, I'm not supposed to. Please don't tell my father. The fear in his voice made Maria's chest hurt. It's okay, she said, stepping into the room. I'm Maria, I'm new here. What's your name? Daniel. He turned his face toward her voice but kept his distance. You're not going to tell him? Tell him what? That you touched a piano. Why would that be wrong? Daniel's shoulders sagged. Everything I do is wrong. That's why he keeps me up here, away from everything. Maria moved closer and sat on the bench beside him, leaving plenty of space between them. Up close, she could see he had his mother's features. Mrs. Chen had mentioned the late Mrs. Thornton sometimes. Said she was beautiful and kind and played piano like an angel. This was your mother's piano? Maria asked gently. Daniel nodded. She used to play every day. I'd sit right here and listen. She said music tells stories that words can't. She promised she'd teach me someday. His voice cracked. But then she got sick. I'm very sorry. My father can't stand it when I come in here. He says I'll break something. That I can't appreciate it because I can't see it. That I'll just hurt myself trying to do things I can't do. Maria felt anger rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She'd seen this before. Parents who were so afraid of their children getting hurt that they wrapped them in cotton wool until the children couldn't breathe. Can I tell you a secret? Maria said. Daniel tilted his head, curious. I used to teach piano. Back in Manila before I came here. I had a small studio in my apartment and children would come after school for lessons. Really? For the first time, there was something other than sadness in Daniel's voice. Were you good? Maria laughed. I was okay. Not good enough to be a concert pianist like I dreamed when I was young. But good enough to teach others. Good enough to love it. What's it like? Daniel asked. Playing, I mean. Really playing, not just pressing keys. It's like, Maria thought for a moment. It's like speaking without words. Your fingers say things your mouth can't. When I was sad about leaving my children to come here, I would play, and somehow the sadness would flow out through my hands and into the music, and afterward, I could breathe again. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked so quietly Maria almost missed it. Do you think I could learn? Even though I can't see. Maria looked at this small, lonely boy, and she thought about her own children growing up without her. She thought about all the rules she'd been given about staying invisible and not interfering. She thought about the hard, cold man who owned this house and how he'd react if he found out. Then she looked at the piano, silent and waiting, and she made a decision that would change everything. Yes, Maria said firmly. I know you could learn. Some of the greatest pianists in history were blind. They heard things that sighted people missed. They felt the music in ways others couldn't. But my father... Your father works very long hours, doesn't he? Daniel nodded slowly, understanding dawning on his face. You mean... Secretly? I mean that there are many hours in the day when this house is quiet. When you could learn something that might make you happy. When you could honor your mother's memory by doing something she loved. She could see the war happening inside him. Fear of his father's anger versus the desperate hunger for something, anything that was his own. What if he finds out? Daniel whispered. Then we'll deal with it. But Daniel, let me ask you something. If you never try, if you spend your whole life in this house doing nothing, learning nothing, being nothing, won't that hurt worse than anything your father could say? Daniel sat very still. Then slowly, he reached out and placed his right hand on the keys. His fingers found the positions naturally, like they'd been waiting for this moment. When can we start? He asked. Maria smiled. How about right now? Let me teach you where middle C is and we'll go from there. As Daniel's fingers touched the keys and Maria began to guide his hands, neither of them realized they were starting something that would shake the foundations of the Thornton mansion. Neither of them knew that this one simple act of kindness would lead to heartbreak, discovery, and ultimately redemption. All they knew was that in that moment, in that quiet room with the afternoon sunlight streaming through windows Daniel couldn't see, something was beginning, something that felt like hope. And in the hallway, Mrs. Chen walked past and heard the tentative notes of a piano scale. She paused, considered going in to stop it, then shook her head and kept walking. Sometimes she thought rules were meant to be broken. Sometimes the heart knew better than the head. Inside the music room, Daniel pressed the keys again and again, and for the first time in 3 years, he smiled. The lessons began the very next day. Maria waited until Richard left for the office at 7 in the morning, his briefcase in hand and his mind already at work. She finished her morning cleaning duties quickly, then went to find Daniel. He was in his room listening to an audiobook about astronomy, but his mind was clearly elsewhere. Ready? Maria asked from the doorway. Daniel jumped up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. Yes, I've been awake since 5. I couldn't sleep. They made their way to the music room, Daniel's hand lightly touching the wall for guidance, though Maria noticed he was starting to count his steps, memorizing the path. The boy was smart. She'd seen that right away. Maria started with the absolute basics. She showed Daniel how to sit properly, spine straight but not stiff. She taught him about posture and how it affected breathing, and how breathing affected playing. Then she placed his hands on the keys. The piano has 88 keys, Maria explained, but we're going to start with just 8. 1 octave. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. You know this from songs, yes? Daniel nodded eagerly. My mother used to sing it. Good, now the keys go in a pattern. 3 white keys, then 2 black keys, then 4 white keys, then 3 black keys. Over and over all the way across. The black keys are shorter, raised up. Feel them? Daniel's fingers explored the keyboard with intense concentration. Yes, I feel it. The pattern repeats. Exactly. This pattern is how you'll always know where you are on the piano. You never have to see. You just have to feel. Over the next hour, they worked on finding middle C and playing a simple scale. Daniel's fingers were clumsy at first, hitting wrong notes, pressing too hard. But Maria was patient. She'd learned long ago that teaching was about encouragement, not perfection. You're doing great, she said when Daniel got frustrated. You know what the difference is between a beginner and an expert? The expert has made more mistakes. Every wrong note teaches your fingers where not to go next time. They practiced every day after that. An hour in the morning after Richard left, and another hour in the late afternoon before he came home. Sometimes Maria's other duties had to wait, but Mrs. Chen seemed to understand. The older woman never said anything directly, but she'd cover for Maria when needed, keeping the other staff away from the music room during lesson time. Daniel absorbed everything like a sponge. Within a week, he could play a simple melody with his right hand. Within 2 weeks, both hands were working together on basic exercises. Maria taught him about rhythm by having him tap patterns on the table during lunch. She taught him about dynamics by comparing soft notes to whispers and loud notes to shouts. But more than the technical progress, what amazed Maria was the change in Daniel himself. The boy who'd been so withdrawn, so quiet, so hidden away was coming alive. He started asking questions about everything. What did clouds feel like? What color was blue? Could you hear someone smile? Why do you ask about hearing smiles? Maria asked him one day. Because I can hear yours, Daniel said simply. When you're happy, your voice goes up a little at the ends of words. When you're worried, it gets tighter. I notice these things because I can't see faces. Maria realized then that Daniel's blindness had given him a gift that most people never developed. He heard the world in layers. He could detect emotions in a voice that others would miss. And when he played piano, that sensitivity came through. 3 weeks into the lesson, something extraordinary happened. Maria was teaching Daniel a simple piece by Mozart, a beginner's minuet. She played it through once so he could hear it, then began teaching him the right-hand part, note by note. But after hearing it just twice, Daniel interrupted her. Wait, let me try something. His hands moved to the keys and he played the entire right-hand melody from memory. Perfectly. Every note in the right place. Maria sat back, stunned. Daniel, how did you... I don't know, he said, looking confused himself. I just heard it in my head and my fingers knew where to go. Did I do it wrong? No, Maria breathed. You did it exactly right. Daniel, I think you have what they call perfect pitch. You can hear a note and know exactly what it is. And you have incredible musical memory. Is that good? Good? It's extraordinary. Many musicians would give anything for what you have naturally. Daniel's face lit up with a smile so bright it could have powered the whole house. For the first time in his life, there was something special about him that had nothing to do with his blindness, something that made him exceptional, not different, something that was entirely his own. The lessons got more ambitious. Maria started teaching him pieces that were technically above beginner level, and Daniel tackled them with fierce determination. When he made mistakes, he'd practice that one section 50 times until his fingers knew it automatically. When his hands got tired, he'd rest for 10 minutes, then beg to continue. One afternoon, about 6 weeks into their secret arrangement, Maria brought down a book of Chopin waltzes from the shelf. These are more advanced, she warned. Very beautiful but complicated. Can you play one for me? Daniel asked. Maria sat at the piano and played waltz in a minor. Her fingers weren't as nimble as they'd been in her youth, and she stumbled over a few passages, but the beauty of the piece still came through. When she finished, she looked over at Daniel and was startled to see tears on his face. "Daniel? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said, wiping his eyes. "That was beautiful. It made me feel, I don't know, like being sad and happy at the same time. Like missing my mother, but also remembering good things about her." "That's what Chopin does," Maria said softly. "He puts feelings into music that are too complicated for words. Can I learn to do that? Not just play the notes, but make people feel things?" Maria put her hand over his. "You already do, Daniel. When you play, I hear your heart in every note. That's something you can't teach. That's something you're born with." They sat together in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Daniel said, "Maria, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you being so nice to me? I mean, you're the maid. You're supposed to clean and cook, not teach me piano. You could get in trouble. You could lose your job, so why?" Maria thought about how to answer. She thought about her own children, growing up without her. She thought about all the lonely kids in the world who just needed one person to believe in them. "You know what I miss most about home?" she finally said. "Teaching. When I had my little studio and children would come for lessons, I wasn't just teaching them piano. I was teaching them that they could do something difficult, that they could work hard and see results, that they had something valuable to offer the world." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When I saw you sitting at this piano that first day, so afraid, so convinced you couldn't do anything important, I saw my purpose again. Sometimes God puts people in our path not by accident, but because we need each other. You need someone to believe in you. And I need to be that someone. Does that make sense?" Daniel nodded slowly. "My mother used to say things like that, about people being put in each other's lives for a reason." "Your mother sounds like she was very wise." "She was." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I wish she could hear me play." "Maybe she can," Maria said. "I believe that people we love never really leave us. I think your mother knows what you're doing. I think she's proud." A single tear rolled down Daniel's cheek, but he was smiling. "Then I want to get good enough to make her really proud. Not just play the notes, but play like you did just now, with feeling." "Then let's keep working," Maria said. "But we need to be more careful. Your father comes home earlier sometimes. We can't let him hear." They developed a system. Mrs. Chen would text Maria if Richard's car turned onto their street. They'd stop immediately, and Daniel would go back to his room. Maria would be cleaning somewhere else in the house. The piano would sit silent as if nothing had happened. But close calls started happening. One evening, Richard came home an hour early because of a canceled meeting. Maria and Daniel barely had time to stop playing and separate. Richard walked past the music room and paused, sniffing the air. "Does something smell different in here?" he asked Mrs. Chen, who happened to be in the hallway. "Maria cleaned it today, sir," Mrs. Chen said smoothly. "New polish." Richard nodded and moved on, but Maria's heart had nearly stopped. They'd have to be even more careful. Despite the risks, the lessons continued. Daniel was progressing at an astonishing rate. Within 3 months, he could play intermediate pieces with confidence. Within 4 months, he was tackling advanced Chopin nocturnes and Debussy preludes. His fingers had developed muscle memory for thousands of note combinations. His internal sense of rhythm was flawless, but more importantly, Daniel was discovering who he was. He'd spent 12 years being defined by what he couldn't do. Now he was learning what he could do, and it was transforming him from the inside out. "I've been thinking," Daniel said one day during a break in their lesson. "When I get older, do you think I could be a professional pianist? Like perform in concert halls?" Maria heard the hope and fear mixed in his voice. She knew she had to be honest. "I think you could be whatever you want to be, Daniel. But you'd need proper training, real music school, theory classes, performance experience, things I can't give you here. My father would never let me go to music school. Maybe not now, but you're 12. In 6 years, you'll be 18, an adult. Then the choice will be yours." Daniel sat with that thought. 6 years seems like forever. Then let's make these 6 years count. Let's get you so good that when the time comes, no music school in the world could say no to you. That became their mission. Every day they pushed harder. Daniel practiced scales until his fingers moved faster than thought. He memorized pieces in multiple keys. He learned music theory through audio lessons that Maria found online. He listened to recordings of great pianists and learned to hear the subtle differences in their interpretations. And slowly, Daniel wasn't just playing music anymore. He was becoming music. 5 months into the lessons, Maria made a recording of Daniel playing Clair de Lune by Debussy. She used her phone. The audio quality wasn't great, but it captured something special. That night in her small room, she listened to it 3 times, crying each time. The boy was extraordinary. She thought about sending it to her old professor at the music conservatory in Manila. She thought about showing someone, anyone, what Daniel could do. But that would break their secret. And the secret was all that protected them. Maria tried not to think about what would happen when Richard inevitably found out. Because deep down she knew he would. Secrets in houses never stayed buried forever. Someone would slip up, someone would tell. The music would be too loud or Richard would come home too early. But for now, in these stolen hours, Daniel was free. And Maria was teaching again. And the piano that had sat silent for 3 years was filled with life once more. Neither of them could know that their time was running out faster than they thought. Neither of them could see the storm that was gathering. All they could do was cherish each lesson, each note, each moment of grace they'd been given. And when Daniel played, the mansion didn't feel like a fortress anymore. It felt like home. 6 months had passed since that first lesson, and autumn had arrived, painting the world in colors Daniel could only imagine. The trees outside the mansion turned gold and red, though Daniel knew this only because Maria described them during their breaks. She'd learned that he loved hearing about things he couldn't see, that her descriptions helped him build a world in his mind. The lessons had evolved far beyond simple scales and basic pieces. Daniel was now playing compositions that even advanced students struggled with. He'd mastered Beethoven's Pathetique Sonata, could play Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, and was working his way through a Bach fugue that made Maria's head spin just thinking about the complexity. But today was special. Today, Maria had decided to teach him Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, the full piece, all 3 movements, not just the famous first one that everyone knew. This piece tells a story, Maria explained, as they sat side by side at the piano. The first movement is like walking in moonlight, soft and dreamlike. The second movement is lighter, like a brief moment of hope, and the third movement is like a storm breaking, all that emotion that was hiding under the surface exploding out. Like how I feel sometimes, Daniel said quietly. Calm on the outside because I have to be, but everything inside is loud and wild. Maria looked at him with understanding. Then this is your piece. Let's begin. They worked on it for hours, Maria breaking down each section, Daniel absorbing it all with that incredible memory of his. By the end of their session, he had the first movement nearly perfect. The second movement was coming along. The third movement, with its furious runs and crashing chords, would take more time. We'll work on it tomorrow, Maria said, glancing at her watch. It was 4:30. Richard usually came home around 7, sometimes later. They had plenty of time, but Maria didn't know that Richard's afternoon meeting had been canceled. She didn't know that his business partner had called in sick. She didn't know that Richard, tired and frustrated, had decided to come home early for the first time in months. At 5:15, Richard's car pulled through the gates. Maria and Daniel were deep into the third movement of the Moonlight Sonata. Daniel's hands were flying across the keys, attacking the difficult passages with fierce concentration. The music filled the house, passionate and powerful and impossible to ignore. Richard parked in the circular driveway and got out, loosening his tie. The October air was crisp, and he was looking forward to a quiet evening with some paperwork and a glass of scotch. As he walked toward the front door, he heard something that stopped him cold. Piano music. Not just any piano music. The Moonlight Sonata, third movement, being played with technical skill and emotional depth that took his breath away. For a moment, Richard was transported back in time. His wife, Elena, had played this piece at their engagement party. She'd played it with tears streaming down her face because she was so happy. He remembered every note, every moment, every feeling. But Elena was gone. So who was playing? Richard's first thought was that Mrs. Chen had hired some musician to perform, though why she would do that made no sense. His second thought was that someone had broken into the house. His third thought, which he dismissed immediately because it was impossible, was that it was a recording. But this wasn't a recording. The playing was too immediate, too real. Richard walked slowly toward the front door, his briefcase forgotten in his hand. The music grew louder, more intense. He could feel it in his chest, each note like a hammer blow against his carefully constructed walls. He opened the door as quietly as possible and stepped inside. The music was coming from the music room. Elena's room. The room he'd avoided for 3 years because it hurt too much to go in there. Richard moved through the entrance hall like a man in a dream. His footsteps were silent on the marble floor. The music pulled him forward, beautiful and terrible and impossible. He reached the music room doorway and looked inside. Time stopped. There, at the Steinway Grand that had been Elena's pride and joy, sat Daniel, his son. His blind son who he'd protected and sheltered and kept away from everything that might hurt him. Daniel, whose fingers were dancing across the keys with the kind of skill that took years to develop. Daniel, whose face was transformed by concentration and joy and pure, absolute freedom. And standing beside Daniel, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, was the maid, Maria, the woman he'd hired 6 months ago and barely spoken to since. Richard's mind couldn't process what he was seeing. Daniel couldn't play piano. That was impossible. Daniel had never had lessons. Daniel couldn't do something like this without him knowing, without his permission, without his control. The third movement built to its crashing finale, and Daniel played through it flawlessly, his small body swaying with the music, completely lost in the moment. When the final chord faded, there was a brief silence. Then Daniel turned toward where Maria was standing and smiled. "How was that? Did I get the ending right?" "It was perfect," Maria said, and Richard could hear tears in her voice. "Your mother would be so proud." That's when something inside Richard shattered. What the hell is going on here? His voice cut through the room like a knife. Daniel jumped so violently he nearly fell off the piano bench. Maria spun around, her face going pale. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. "Dad?" Daniel's voice was small and terrified. "I can explain." "You can explain." Richard's voice was rising, all his shock transforming into fury. "You can explain why you've been lying to me for God knows how long. Why you've been sneaking around behind my back." "Mr. Thornton, please." Maria stepped forward, putting herself slightly between Richard and Daniel. "This isn't Daniel's fault. I'm the one who what? Who disobeyed my rules? Who manipulated my son? Who decided you knew better than I do what's good for my own child? I didn't manipulate anyone." Maria's own voice had heat in it now. "I taught him something beautiful. Something that makes him happy. Look at him. I am looking at him. I'm looking at my blind son who you convinced to do something dangerous, something he has no business doing, something that could only end in disappointment." "Dangerous?" Maria's eyes flashed. "Music is dangerous? Happiness is dangerous? Dad, please." Daniel was on his feet now, reaching out blindly toward his father's voice. "Don't be mad at Maria, this was my choice. I wanted to learn. I begged her to teach me." "You're 12 years old," Richard shouted. "You don't know what you want. You don't understand that some things just aren't possible for you." Those words hung in the air like poison. Daniel's face crumbled. All the confidence, all the joy, all the life that had been building in him over 6 months collapsed in an instant. He looked like he'd been slapped. "Not possible for me," Daniel repeated quietly. "Because I'm blind. Because I'm broken. Because I can't do anything real. That's not what I meant." "Yes, it is." Daniel's voice was eerily calm now. "That's exactly what you meant. That's what you've always meant. That's why you keep me locked up here. Because you think I can't do anything. That I'll just fail and get hurt and embarrass you. I'm protecting you. From what? From living?" Daniel's hands were shaking. "Mom wouldn't have done this. Mom believed in me." Richard flinched like he'd been hit. "Don't you dare bring your mother into this." "Why not?" "She's the reason I wanted to learn." "This was her piano. This was her music. And I'm good at it, Dad. I'm really good at it. For the first time in my life, there's something I can do that makes me feel like I matter. And you want to take it away from me. That's enough." Richard turned to Maria, his face hard as stone. "You're fired. Pack your things and get out of my house tonight." Maria's face went white. "Mr. Thornton, please think about what you're doing." "I've thought about it. You violated my trust. You went behind my back. You convinced my son to keep secrets from me. You're done here. For teaching him piano. For giving him confidence and purpose and joy. That's what you're firing me for? For overstepping. For thinking you have any right to make decisions about my son's life. For acting like you're part of this family when you're just the help. The words were cruel, designed to hurt, and they hit their mark. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. I see, she said quietly. I'm just the help. The help who spent 6 months watching your son transform from a sad, lonely child into someone who believes in himself. The help who gave up her lunch breaks and stay up late planning lessons. The help who actually sees what Daniel is capable of instead of what he can't do. Get out. Dad, no. Daniel was crying now, reaching toward Maria. Please don't make her leave. I'll stop playing. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, Daniel, go to your room, but now. The shout echoed through the mansion. Daniel stood there shaking, tears streaming down his face. Then he turned and walked out of the room, his hands trailing along the wall for guidance, his shoulders shaking with sobs. Maria watched him go, her heart breaking. Then she turned back to Richard. You're making a terrible mistake. The only mistake I made was hiring you. No. Your mistake is being so afraid that you're suffocating your son. Your mistake is loving him so much that you've forgotten how to show it. Your mistake is thinking that keeping him safe means keeping him small. You don't know anything about me or my son. I know that he plays Beethoven like he was born to do it. I know that he has perfect pitch and musical memory that music schools would kill for. I know that he could have an extraordinary future if you'd just let him try. And I know that your wife would be ashamed of what you've become. The moment the words left her mouth, Maria regretted them. But it was too late. Richard's face went very still. When he spoke, his voice was cold as ice. You have 1 hour to pack and leave. If you're not gone by then, I'll call the police and have you removed for trespassing. And if you ever try to contact Daniel again, I'll make sure you regret it. Do you understand? Maria held his gaze for a long moment. Then she nodded. I understand. But answer me one question. When Daniel was playing just now, before you knew it was him, what did you feel? Richard didn't answer. You felt something, Maria continued softly. I saw it on your face, wonder, pride, love. For just a moment before you knew who was playing, you let yourself feel those things. That's who your son is. That's what he can do. And you're about to throw it all away because you're scared. Get out of my house, Maria nodded slowly. I'll go, but someday you're going to realize what you did here, and I hope it's not too late when you do. She walked past him, her head high despite the tears on her face. In the hallway, she nearly ran into Mrs. Chen, who'd been listening from around the corner. I'm sorry, Mrs. Chen whispered. I'm so sorry. Take care of him, Maria said. Please, don't let him give up. Then she went to her small room off the kitchen and began packing the few belongings she'd brought to this house 6 months ago. She could hear Daniel crying in his room upstairs. She could hear Richard in his study slamming drawers. In 1 hour, she was gone. The house was silent again. The piano sat untouched, and upstairs in his room, Daniel lay on his bed and cried like his heart was breaking. Because it was. The first week after Maria left was the worst. Richard tried to go back to normal, pretending nothing had changed. He went to work early, came home late, buried himself in contracts and negotiations. He hired a new maid through the agency, an efficient woman named Patricia, who kept to herself and followed every rule to the letter. But the house felt different now. Wrong somehow. Daniel stopped coming out of his room except for meals. He stopped listening to audiobooks. He stopped asking questions. When the tutors came for his lessons, they reported that he wasn't paying attention, wasn't completing assignments, wasn't engaging at all. He seems depressed, one of them told Richard carefully. Has something happened? He's fine, Richard said curtly. Just increase the difficulty of the work. He needs to focus on real subjects, not waste time on nonsense. But Daniel wasn't fine, and everyone in the house knew it. Mrs. Chen tried to talk to the boy, but he'd just shake his head and turn away. Patricia tried to be kind, but Daniel barely acknowledged her presence. The house staff whispered among themselves, worried but helpless, and the piano sat in the music room, untouched and silent. Richard had it moved to the storage room in the basement. Out of sight. Problem solved. He told himself he'd done the right thing. He was protecting his son from inevitable disappointment, from false hope, from the pain that would come when Daniel realized he couldn't make a career out of music, couldn't live a normal life, couldn't be what he dreamed of being. But at night, Richard couldn't sleep. He'd lie awake remembering the moment he'd walked into that music room, the way Daniel's face had looked so alive, so confident, so completely transformed, the way his hands had moved across the keys like they belonged there. And the music. God, the music. Richard had been to concerts. He'd heard professionals play. But something about Daniel's playing had hit differently. It was raw and honest and full of feeling. It was Elena's playing, but somehow more. It was extraordinary. Richard shoved those thoughts away. He'd made his decision. It was done. 2 weeks after Maria left, Richard came home to find Daniel in the kitchen with Mrs. Chen. The boy was sitting at the counter, barely touching his dinner. "You need to eat," Mrs. Chen was saying gently. "I'm not hungry. You haven't been hungry for 2 weeks. You're getting too thin." Daniel pushed the plate away. "Why does it matter?" "Because your body needs food. My body needs lots of things it can't have." The bitterness in his voice made Richard flinch. He stood in the doorway unseen and watched his son. Daniel looked smaller somehow, dimmer, like someone had turned down his light. That night, Richard found himself walking to the storage room. He stood in front of the covered piano for a long time, not quite sure what he was doing there. Finally, he pulled off the cover and sat on the bench. He hadn't played since Elena died. Hadn't wanted to, but now his fingers found the keys almost by themselves and he played a simple melody. Chopsticks. The first thing every kid learns. His playing was clumsy and hesitant. Nothing like Daniel's, nothing like Elena's. He thought about Maria's last words to him. "Your wife would be ashamed of what you've become, would she? Would Elena be proud of how he'd handled this?" Richard knew the answer. Elena had believed in potential. She'd believed in taking chances. She'd believed that their son's blindness was a characteristic, not a limitation. And Richard had spent 3 years proving her wrong by treating Daniel like he was made of glass. But knowing it and changing it were two different things. 3 weeks after Maria left, Richard received a call from his sister, Amanda. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since their argument about how he was raising Daniel. "I heard what happened," Amanda said without preamble. "The staff talk, Richard. Word gets around. This is none of your business. My nephew is my business. What were you thinking? The boy finally found something he loved, something he was good at, and you crushed it. I was protecting him from disappointment. No, you were protecting yourself. From having to watch him try and possibly fail. From having to be present and supportive. From actually being a father instead of a jailer. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you? Elena would be heartbroken if she could see what you've done. That boy worshipped his mother and you won't even let him honor her memory by playing her piano. You don't understand. Then explain it to me. Explain how keeping your son miserable is somehow protecting him. Explain how firing the only person who made him happy was the right choice." "I'm listening." Richard couldn't explain. The words wouldn't come. Finally, he said, "I can't lose him too." Amanda's voice softened. "Oh, Richard. Don't you see? You're losing him anyway, just in a different way. He's right there in your house and you're losing him day by day because you won't let him live." After they hung up, Richard sat in his study for hours, staring at nothing. He thought about Daniel's face when he'd been playing. He thought about Maria's words. He thought about Elena and what she would say if she were here. He knew what she'd say. She'd tell him he was being an idiot. 4 weeks after Maria left, Richard made a decision. He hired a private investigator. Not to harass Maria like he'd threatened, but to check on her, to make sure she was okay. The report came back 3 days later and it made Richard feel sick. Maria was working 3 jobs. She cleaned offices from midnight to 6 in the morning. She washed dishes at a restaurant from noon to 4. She did laundry at a facility from 6 to 10 at night. She was barely sleeping, living in a tiny studio apartment in a bad neighborhood, sending almost every penny back to her children in the Philippines. The investigator included photos. Maria looked exhausted, years older than she had just a month ago. But in one photo, taken as she walked to the bus stop, she was listening to something on her phone. The investigator noted that she'd been playing a recording over and over. He'd gotten close enough to hear it. It was Daniel playing Claire de Lune. She'd recorded him and kept it. Even after everything, even after being fired and humiliated, she still listened to Daniel's music. Richard stared at that report for a long time. Then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He went to Daniel's room and actually talked to his son. "Can I come in?" he asked from the doorway. Daniel was lying on his bed facing the wall. It's your house. Richard stepped inside and sat in the chair by Daniel's desk. For a moment, he didn't know how to begin. I know you're angry with me, he finally said. I'm not angry. I'm nothing. That's what you want, right? For me to be nothing, do nothing, want nothing. That's not what I want. Then what do you want? Richard took a breath. I want you to be safe. I want you to be protected. I want you to never be hurt or disappointed or alive. Daniel sat up, turning toward his father's voice. You want me to never be alive? Because that's what you're describing, Dad. A life where nothing bad happens because nothing happens at all. I'm your father. I'm supposed to protect you. From what? From piano? From music? From being good at something? Daniel's voice cracked. I was happy. For the first time since Mom died, I was actually happy, and you took it away. I was scared. The admission hung in the air. Daniel tilted his head, surprised. Scared of what? Of losing you. Richard's voice was rough. When your mother got sick, I couldn't do anything. I couldn't fix it. I couldn't save her. I had all this money and power, and none of it mattered. And then after she was gone, all I had left was you. And I thought if I could just keep you safe, if I could just control everything around you, then nothing bad would happen. But Dad, that's not living. That's just existing. I know that now. Richard rubbed his face. I heard you play that day. The Moonlight Sonata. And for a moment before I realized it was you, I felt, I don't know, wonder, pride, and then I saw it was you and I panicked. Because you were doing something I couldn't control, something that might lead to disappointment or failure or pain. Or it might lead to something amazing, Daniel said quietly. That's what Maria said. She said I could be as good as I wanted to be if I worked hard enough. She believed in me, I know. Do you believe in me? It was such a simple question, but Richard felt the weight of it. His answer would matter, maybe more than anything he'd ever said. Yes, he said finally. I do. I think I always did, but I was too scared to admit it. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Is Maria okay? I had someone check on her. She's working hard. She's struggling. Because you fired her. Yes, because I fired her. Richard stood up. I don't know if I can fix this, Daniel. I don't know if I can make things right. But I want to try. If you'll let me. How? I don't know yet. But I'm going to figure it out. After Richard left, Daniel lay back down on his bed. For the first time in weeks, there was a tiny spark of something in his chest. It wasn't quite hope, but it was close. The next day, Richard did something he'd never done before. He canceled all his meetings and spent the entire day at home. He went to the storage room and looked at the piano. He thought about his wife and what she would want. He thought about Daniel and what the boy needed. And then he thought about Maria, working 3 jobs, exhausted and alone, but still listening to Daniel's music on her phone. That's when Richard knew what he had to do. It was crazy. It would require him to admit he was wrong. It would require him to be vulnerable. It would require him to change everything about how he'd been living. But for the first time in 3 years, Richard Thornton was ready to change. He picked up his phone and made a call. Then another. Then another. In her tiny apartment, Maria came home from her night shift and collapsed on her bed, too tired to even take off her shoes. Her phone was on the pillow beside her, the recording of Daniel's Clair de Lune ready to play. She didn't know that her life was about to change again. She didn't know that Richard Thornton was about to do something that would shock everyone who knew him. All she knew was that she missed teaching. She missed Daniel, and she missed believing that she could make a difference in someone's life. But sometimes when we think we've lost everything, that's exactly when everything is about to begin.